So welcome to the first tutorial on SPSS. I start recording these because last year I noticed a lot of students had trouble with SPSS at home. You can click along if you download a version of SPSS, which I will show you in a minute. And just a short disclaimer, I will not explain anything about statistical theory. This will be discussed in class. And if you hear any random noises, these are either construction workers outside or a kindergarten next to my house. So that explains why sometimes there's some weird noises in the background. So first thing you need to do is to get a version of SPSS on your personal computer. So if you go to Spss, you can type in SPSS in the searching box, and then you will find all these versions of SPSS. I personally use version 22, but the newest version is 26, and it's not very different. So I would just recommend to download the newest version 26. For 10 euros, you can use it for a year, so this is actually a pretty good deal. You download the program and you open it, and once you've done that, you see something like this. This is an empty data frame. It looks like Excel. You can kind of compare it to an Excel file, but there are no data in here yet. So we need to download data. We need to download data frames, and I've provided those data frames on Moodle. So what you need to do first is go to Moodle, download all the data frames that are on Moodle, and place them in a folder on your personal computer. So on your G drive or any other drive that is convenient for you. I've already downloaded these files. So to open one of those files, you go to Open, you select Data, and because I'm a regular user of SPSS, I end up in my folder datasets, but if it's not here, you can also go to Documents, Datasets, and here you see all the datasets that we will be using for this course. For this video, I will use the textbook dataset. This is a dataset that we will use quite a lot because it belongs to the reader that we are using. So you just can click on Open. Okay, so once you have opened your dataset, you will see something that looks like this, which can look quite overwhelming at first, but once you know how to read these tables, it's actually quite simple. So on the left, we see all these different rows. So we have row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, and it goes over 600 to the last participants, which is 654. So it's quite a lot of data in this data set. So the rows are participants and the columns are variables. So this is variable 1, which is called ID, variable 2, which is called PRCA1, PRCA2, PRCA3. And if, for example, we would like to know what participant 8 scored on the third variable or the third PRCA variable, we just click on participant 8, we scroll down, and we see that this participant had a value of 2 for this particular variable. Well, sometimes you see these dots appearing in your data set, and these mean or these indicate that values are missing. So for this participant, the entire PRCA scale is missing. So it's gone. It's not included in the data set. We will talk about this later, but what we could do is decide to remove these participants, or we could leave them in the data set. But for now, we just leave them as they are. What you also should note is that we have a lot of variables in this data set. So it runs from PRCA all the way to attitude about higher education. So it has quite a lot of variables and a lot of participants. If we want to get a quick overview of what variables are included into this data set, we go to a different view, so a different window within SPSS. We're now currently into the data view, and the data view includes all the variables of all participants on all variables. And we could also go to the variable view, which gives us a table with all the variables that were included in this specific SPSS file. Not only that, it also gives us some information about these variables. For example, if you were wondering what PRCA, what that means, this is indicated under label. So it actually means communication apprehension. If you want to know what that means, please look it up in the book. But here we can find some short explanations for all variables. So we have willingness to communicate, belief that everybody should be required to take public speaking classes. We have gender, we have political affiliation, etc., etc. So here we see all the explanations of the variables that were included in this data set. Note that these all have the same name, so they all have the same PRCA code, so probably they form a scale together. So this was question 1 on the scale, this was question 2, this was question 3, this was question 4. And what you could do in your own data sets to make your life easier is under a label to type in what the question actually was. However, if we go back to our data view, we see that on all these PRCA variables, the participants could have a score from 1 to 5. So in each column, we see that the lowest score is 1. So here, for example, we have a score of 1, and the highest score that is seen in these columns is 5, which means that a participant could answer this question on a scale from 1 to 5. Usually, if we would like to know what 1 means, if it means agree or disagree or neutral, we go to values. However, for this data set, it hasn't been included what these values actually mean. So just to show you how this works, you can also fill it out yourself. Let's say a value of 1 was disagree, and the value of 5 was agree. Then you click on OK, and now here under values, you can actually look up what all these values in this data set, what they actually mean, what you were actually asking your participants. One more important aspect of variable view is the column measure, and this indicates what kind of measurement level your variable has. So we already discussed this in class. We had nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio variables, and here it says scale, ordinal, or nominal. This might be a little bit confusing, but SPSS sees interval and ratios variables as scale variables. So SPSS doesn't make a difference between interval and ratio variables. You can also change these if SPSS made a mistake. So always be aware that if, for example, SPSS has labeled this as nominal, it doesn't mean that this is correct because these can be changed. And let's say these are all our variables. These were all measured, but now I would like to add some more information on my participants. So what I would like to do is at the back of the file, I would like to add a new variable. And we'll just make this new variable in the variable view. So please click from data view to variable view if you weren't there yet. And then scroll all the way to the bottom. We see these empty rows. And in these empty rows, we can start adding new variables. So under name, we place the name of these new variables. And let's say I gave these participants a scale to measure and see if they liked subject statistics or not. So I'm going to call this new variable love for studs. Love for studs. Usually it's preferred if these names are as short as possible. So I could also just have called it studs or statistics. Doesn't really matter that much as long as you know what it means for yourself. And you, of course, you can also include an explanation under label. So how much participants love the statistics. An ambulance is coming by, so maybe you hear some strange noises in the background. Anyway, here under values, I can explain what the values that I need to add in the data view are actually going to mean. Okay, let's just pretend that I have measured the love for statistics on a scale ranging from 1 to 3. So the value 1 means low, click on add, 2 means medium, and 3 means high. Then I click on OK. And right now it says that its measurement level is unknown, but I should actually put it on scale. So if we go to our data view, I see that a new variable has appeared, which is called love for stat, but I see that everybody has missing values in here. And that is because I still need to enter everybody's values for this new variable. And if I would have a record of these scores, I could just add them manually, just typing in 1, 2, 3, and so forth and so forth. But this would take a lot of time to do, right? Adding all these values by hand takes up a lot of time. With new variables, I have to add them this way, but some variables that I'm interested in, I might be able to calculate using SPSS. For example, if I want to know what the sum of the first 3 PRCA items together is, I can use SPSS to calculate this. So I don't need to calculate this by hand and then write everything down. I can just do this inside of SPSS. And the way I do this is I go to transform. I select the first option, so compute variable. And under target variable, I type a new name. So instead of PRCA1 or PRCA2, I now call this PRCA sum 1, 2, 3. Because what I want to do is I want to sum up all of these values of PRCA1, PRCA2, and PRCA3. So I want to do this for every participant. So what I do is first I place my cursor onto this column and I click the right mouse button. Why? Because right now it shows labels and I prefer working with variable names. So I click the first option. Then I see all my variables appearing here and I want to sum up 1 to 3. So the way I do this, I click on 1 and then I click the arrow. Because I want it to be a sum, I put a plus in between them and then I select variable 2. Then I put another plus. So we have added a new variable at the very end of our data file by doing so. And you should see PRCA sum right here. So after the last variable, it should add a column with the sum of PRCA 1, 2, and 3. If we have a closer look at it, we see that for participant 1, there's a value of 7, and for participant 2, a value of 5. If we scroll back, we can check whether these values are correct by adding these numbers. And indeed, if we do so, we find that PRCA1 plus PRCA2 plus PRCA3 is 7. The same for participant 2. 1 plus 1 plus 3 is 5. So these values are correct. SPSS has correctly added the values in the first, second, and third column for every participant. So this is how you create new values of your already existing dataset. Of course, it could also be the case that within a variable, so for example, within variable PRCA1, you made a mistake and you need to correct this. So let's say that in our existing dataset, you have entered value 2, value 1, value 3, but this should be the exact opposite. So if you remember, PRCA skills ranged from 1 to 5. So instead of 1, this should be a 5. And instead of 3, this should be a 2. And instead of 1, again, this should be a 5. So we need to turn the scale around. And a way to make changes in existing variables, so not only turning the scale around, but also, for example, if you made a typo and every one should be a 0, you can use the option recode. And the option recode is also under transform. And we have two of them. We have recode into the same variable and recode into different variables. And I recommend to always use the option recode into different variables. Why is this? Because recode into same variables starts overriding your old data set. So if you make a mistake in recoding, then all the wrong values will appear here, and you cannot undo this. So you cannot go back to the original file other than closing this and opening it again from your folder. So I always recommend to recode into different variables. So we're gonna explore this option. Again, SPSS has a default that it shows variable labels. I personally prefer to work with variable names. So I right-click this and I choose display variable names. And then we see all the variables in our dataset. As I said, I want to change this variable. So I click it and I have to give it a new name. So the original name was PRCA1 and I now want to reverse it. So I want to reverse all values. So I put an R behind the name. For me, that's a general indicator that a variable has been reversed. And just to be clear, I also write this in the label reverse of PRCA1. I click on change. So now the name has changed, and if correctly, there should be added another variable in the end of our dataset. However, we should still identify what we actually want to change about PRCA1. So we click on this box, all the new values. And here we indicate what old value should become as a new value. So I said I want to reverse them so that 1 becomes a 5. And then I click on add. A 2 should then become a 4. Click on add. A 3 should remain a 3. A 4 should get a value of 2. And 5 should get a new value of 1. So as you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm just reversing the values. Once I've done this, I click on continue. I click on OK. And then I go to the end of my data view And indeed, I see that SPSS has added again a new value here with the name BRCA1 reverse. I see that participant 1 and participant 2 have a value of 4 and 5. And if I scroll back to my original variable, which takes some time, I can indeed see that the original value was 2. So the reverse of this is 4. And participant 2 had a 1, so the reverse is 5. So this is how you make changes in existing variables. I think this is about it. This is everything that we're going to cover today. So after this class, you should be able to open data files, load data files, add variables, inspect variables in variable view. You should be able to change existing variables and create new variables. Lastly, I want to show you how to save a data set. If you go to File, you find an option to save or either save under a new name. I'm going to save it under a new name, otherwise it will overwrite my old data set. So I will just put a 2 behind this and then I click on Save.